Hi there, I'm Laura Rainwater, one of the pastors at Parker United Methodist Church, and I hope you are having a good week, that things are going well for you as we continue on in the month of October. I've been also thinking over the last couple of days about the sermon that Pastor Cody gave this past Sunday. She told the story of Anna Oliver, who in the mid-18th century had been leading a Bible study, but then one day over 200 people came to that Bible study, and she realized she couldn't just do what she'd always done, and instead she stood up and she began to preach. This was not something she had planned for, not something she had trained for, but yet she felt like this was an opportunity for her to respond to what the Spirit was doing, even in an unplanned situation. And it was in that moment and afterwards that she began to think that this perhaps is a new calling for her, and shared it with John Wesley, who ultimately agreed that sometimes the Spirit asks us to do things that we never thought would happen. There are times that the unexpected happens. Maybe it's not 200 people showing up at our house and we have to preach instead of just leading a study. But there are times when our plans go awry or something comes into our midst that we had not anticipated, and we have to learn new things about ourselves and perhaps even new skills. And that's not always easy for people like me who are planners. And when God disrupts our plans, it's often very uncomfortable. But yet God still can speak to us in those moments. It reminds me of a time when I was in seminary, when I was forced to change what my plans were. You see, one summer I served for 10 weeks as a pastoral care intern at one of the local hospitals, one of the large trauma centers. And one of the responsibilities for the interns was to lead worship on Sunday morning at the hospital. We had to lead worship and do the message, and it was sent throughout the television. I guess it's closed circuit television that was in all of the hospital rooms. And so it was one of those moments where I was learning how to preach. I had preached before in other situations, but this was different for me because, like any good seminary student, I had spent lots of time developing my sermon, doing the research, finding the right stories to connect with it. I still remember it was on Isaiah 40, and I kind of focused at that end of Isaiah 40 where we talk about being lifted up on wings like eagles. Well, as I got into my sermon, and of course this was before I had iPads or whatever, so I had all my papers, and I started scrolling through my papers as I was doing my message. I was still kind of reading my manuscript. That's what you kind of do early on in your preaching career. And then I remember flipping the page and noticing that I went from like page 3 to page, I don't know, 8 or 10 or something. And I went, wait a minute, I am missing part of my sermon. And we had to watch our videos later on and had other seminary students look and give their constructive criticism or good feedback. And in the moment when I realized that a portion of my sermon was back at my apartment on the printer, I realized I had to quickly shift gears and do something I'd never done before, which is just begin to preach without notes. I was not prepared for this. I was not ready for it, but I was in that moment when change happened and I had to dig deep within and learn something new on the fly. As my fellow interns watched it the next day, we noticed that in that moment when I realized that my plans, that my printed sermon did not matter anymore, I began to engage at a different level. I will have to say that's the first time I ever preached without notes. It probably took me 10 years to learn again that I could do this because I like to have all of my ducks in a row. I'm a planner. I want to make sure it's all there. But in that moment, I realized that I could do something different. I still had to learn. I still had to trust, but something was changing, and that was okay. When has something like that happened for you? When has something unexpected challenged you and all your plans just went right out the window? But yet In that moment, you felt called to go in a different direction. One story that comes to mind as I was thinking about this is John chapter 4. It's Jesus encountering the Samaritan woman at the well. So hear these words from the Message translation. John 4 is a long chapter. I'm just going to read parts of it as it engages with this woman at the well who meets Jesus. Jesus realized that the Pharisees were keeping count of the baptisms that he and John performed, although his disciples, not Jesus, did the actual baptizing. They had posted the score that Jesus was ahead, turning him and John into rivals in the eyes of the people. So Jesus left the Judean countryside and went back to Galilee. To get there, he had to pass through Samaria. He came into Sychar, a Samaritan village that bordered the field Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was still there. Jesus, worn out by the trip, sat down by the well, and it was noon. A woman, a Samaritan, came to draw water. Jesus said, "Would you give me a drink of water?" His disciples had gone on to the village to buy food for lunch. The Samaritan woman, taken aback, asked, "How come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" Jews in those days wouldn't be caught dead talking to Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the generosity of God and who I am, you would be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh living water." The woman said, "Sir, you don't even have a bucket to draw with, and this well is deep. So how are you going to get this living water? Are you a better man than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well and drank from it, he and his sons and livestock, and passed it down to us?" Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again. Anyone who drinks the water I give will never thirst, not ever. The water I give will be an artesian spring within, gushing fountains of endless life." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty. Won't ever have to come back to this well again." He said, "Go call your husband and then come back." "I have no husband," she said. "That's nicely put. I have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now isn't even your husband. You spoke the truth there, sure enough." Jesus and the woman continued to discuss worship in Jerusalem and Samaria, and their encounter closes with these words. The woman said, "I don't know about that. I do know that the Messiah is coming. When he arrives, we'll get the whole story." "I am he," said Jesus. "You don't have to wait any longer or look any further." Just then his disciples came back. They were shocked. They couldn't believe he was talking with that kind of a woman. No one said what they were all thinking, but their faces showed it. The woman took the hint and left. In her confusion, she left her water pot. Back in the village, she told the people, "Come, see, a man who knew all about the things I did, who knows me inside and out. Do you think this could be the Messiah?" And they went out to see for themselves. And then chapter 4 closes with these words. Many of the Samaritans from that village committed themselves to Jesus because of the woman's witness. "He knew all about the things I did. He knows me inside and out." They asked him to stay on, so Jesus stayed 2 days. A lot more people entrusted their lives to him when they heard what he had to say. They said to the woman, We're no longer taking this on your say-so. We've heard it for ourselves and know it for sure. He's the Savior of the world." What I find fascinating about this encounter is that the woman meets Jesus at the hottest part of the day, at one of the most central locations in town, at the well. But it was probably also the part of the time of day where nobody else was around. Most scholars interpret this to mean she was avoiding the rest of the community. Perhaps she was shunned or she was being shamed for her situation in life. She's probably not the most respected person in town, yet Jesus comes to her. And in this encounter, she is transformed. No longer is she the outsider, but she sets aside her bucket and goes to talk to those people, talk to the rest of the community, and to tell people about this man, Jesus, that she has encountered. In a way, she is the first evangelist, especially in the Gospel of John. She's the first preacher because she tells others about Jesus, about this Messiah who has met her and has seen her and sees her own value. Perhaps these people in Samaria have never learned or heard about Jesus, or they never would without this woman at the well. They would not have had a chance to worship him if it weren't for her transformed life and her new calling. Without her willingness to set aside what she thought about herself, about the expectations of others, maybe she wouldn't have stepped into this new, unplanned future. Without Jesus, her life would have gone on as it had. And without Jesus, perhaps they would not have heard of Jesus as well. What is the gift that you have been given that could astonish you today? What story about your faith might you be able to tell that could help another? How might your interactions with others mean something? Most of us keep doing what we've always done, especially when life is going fine, or it's just okay, or nothing terrible or bad happens. It's only when the rug is pulled out from underneath us, when that disruption comes into our lives, that we have to change, or we have to set aside our plans. And it's in those moments we might dig deep into our own well of faith and realize, who is it we really are? Who is it that God really is to us in this moment of change? How do we dig into that truth about ourselves without waiting for that worst thing to happen, without waiting for that immediate change to occur? I think this is the challenge that I get from this woman at the well. I may not be at the worst point in my life, or maybe I have in the past. Maybe you aren't in your worst situation, or maybe you are. Or maybe you can think back to that moment when life changed. We don't have to talk just about last year or the 2 years before that or the years before that. We all have challenges and struggles. We all have that moment when we're going in one direction and life suddenly shifts. But we can look back and see where God was with us, not necessarily causing that bad thing to happen, but is with us when we are transformed, when we learn about ourselves, or maybe that moment when we learn about who God is in our life and who we are in God's eyes. When we recognize that we matter, that our lives matter, and that we might have a story to tell that could be shared with others. Consider this. Pray about it. Share with somebody your own faith story. Or maybe your faith story doesn't seem that exciting or that dramatic. Maybe you can learn with others that God works in different ways in our lives. No story is the same, but no story is better and no story is worse. But yet we all have these possibilities because we are invited into the life of Christ, because Jesus has called us. Jesus has called us by name. God fills us with power and love and forgiveness and opportunities to serve. Where are you feeling nudged today? Maybe you're feeling nudged to accept that you do matter, that your life does matter, that together our lives matter. Please let me know what you are thinking and what you're learning about yourself. Share it with somebody else, because I think that's the beauty of being part of our church community, is that we learn together, we grow together, and we serve together. So enjoy the beautiful day. You're probably going to watch this on Thursday when the weather is shifting, but know that whether it's dark outside, cloudy, raining, or the sun is shining, we are more together because Christ has called us together. And I pray that you have a blessed day. Amen.